Moving on to one of the most important adjustments, not just in Photoshop but any visual editing software. It can also be a video editing software like Premiere Pro. It's so versatile that it was there 5 to 10 years ago or even more, and it will be there in the future. It is such a constant, and that is curves. And the reason why it's versatile is because it can control the brightness level of any area of an image. It can also control all the colors. It's just one of the tools that I can't live without. It's one of my favorite tools, and it has so many applications across platforms. You can color grade a video with it. You can just match colors with it. There's a lot of use in compositing. There's a ton more uses in retouching. So it's one of those versatile tools that you have to learn, and that should be in the top 10 tools in your arsenal. So in this video, I'm going to show you how it works, what is the concept behind it, how you can use it, and what are the ways you can use it. And also, we have a bunch of real-world examples for you lined up. So without any further ado, let's get started. By the way, the curves has been so important that we have already talked about it in previous lessons in this course, which were not even about curves. So to understand curves better, I've made this simple diagram for you, and through this diagram, let's understand curves. But before we get into this, let me show you what curves actually is if you don't remember. So curves can be created in two ways. We'll get to that later, but for right now, this is how curves look. So if I go to my adjustment layer icon and choose curves, you will see this is the curve, and that's what I've tried to draw right over here. The same graph. I'm going to simplify it for you so that you can understand. So this is the way that you can draw whatever you want inside of the curves and just adjust the brightness levels or the colors of the image. So we'll get to all that later, but no, this is just a representation of this curve so that you can understand this better. Side by side, we'll be looking at a real world example as well. All right, let's hide it. But before we hide it, have a look. There is this thing called input. There's also this thing called output. Just keep that in mind. There's an input, there's an output. What are those? We'll get to that. Okay, so let's delete the curves. That was just for you to see what curves looks like. Okay, so think of this as the curve. On the x-axis or the horizontal axis, this axis right there, this one represents the input, and the vertical axis or the y-axis represents the output. Sorry for my voice breaking right there. Anyway, so this is the input, the x-axis, and this axis is the output. All right. Now, what is there in the input line? What is just there? What does it stand for? Well, let's say this is just a basic curve for representation purposes so that we don't get confused. On the input axis, or the horizontal axis or the x-axis, we have brightness levels. Now, brightness levels in Photoshop are represented by numbers from 0 to 255, where 0 is the blackest black and 255 is the whitest white. In other words, where 0 is absolute black and 255 is absolute white. Now keep in mind, we are talking about the RGB channel curves here, right? We'll get to that later, but this is just the basic curves. Okay, so right now we know two things. X-axis or the horizontal axis represents the input. The y-axis or the vertical axis represents the output. For the input and the output, we have different brightness levels, and brightness levels can be represented by numbers, where 0 is absolute black and 255 is absolute white. Okay, now let me just turn that on so that it's clearer to you. 100% black, 100% white, 100% white. Okay, now input can also be represented as target brightness level, and the output is the result brightness level. Not making sense? Let me try to make some sense out of it. Okay, so let's say we have this image open, all right? And we create a curves adjustment layer, click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose curves. We have a curves adjustment layer on top. Now let's put it at the side, or let's just make it bigger. Okay, this is the same curve that we represented right there. On the left hand side, just focus on one axis for now. On the left hand side, we have 0, and on the right hand side, we have 255, which means that the representation goes from dark to bright. Okay, and this is the input. First, you have to always think about input. We'll think about output later, but first we need to give an input so that we can have an output. So let's move back to this image. So in this image, we know that the clouds are bright. So let's say you want to make the clouds darker. So look at this horizontal axis. It's even denoted right there that it goes from dark to bright. See, going from black to white in a gradient right over here as well. See that? Okay. So we know that clouds are bright. So if we have to make the clouds darker, we need to target that area. Now clouds are bright and bright areas are shown where? On the right side, because if we move back to the graph, have a look at it, left side is 0, right side is 255. It goes from 0 to 255. So right side, this area is the bright area, and as it goes slowly and gradually to the dark area, right? Just focus on this axis right now. So we know that clouds will be somewhere in the bright areas. So we'll make a point right here on the right hand side, on the bright areas. And now we want to make this darker. So let me reset the curves. By the way, this is the way you reset the curve. So we're going to make a point right over. Whoops, I moved it accidentally. So we're going to make a point right over here. Okay. And now we need to bring it up or down. Now we need to think about output. Now, when you look at the output axis right there, or the y-axis, it goes from 0 at the bottom to 255 at the top. So it goes from dark to bright. Now we have selected the bright areas as an input. Now what do you want to do with it? Do you want to make it even more brighter, or do you want to make it darker? We want to make it darker. So to make it darker, which is the output is we want to make it darker. So to make it darker, what do we have to do? We have to bring it down, because if you look at the output axis, 0 is at the bottom, dark is at the bottom, and it goes from dark to bright. So if we want to make the bright areas darker, we're gonna have to bring this point down. So now as you can see, the clouds are dark and it has more drama. But there's another problem right there. The problem is the dark areas are getting even more darker. I don't want the dark areas to get darker. I want it to be less dark. So what do? Keep in mind, in the x-axis or in the input axis, the dark areas are on the left side and the bright areas are on the right side. So our first job is targeting the dark areas. So we need to make a point on the left side. Now that we have targeted the dark areas, and that's why we call it target brightness level, now we need to think about the result. So this is the result brightness level. So what do we want to do with that dark brightness level? We want to brighten it. So to brighten it, what do? We bring it up. Why? Because up is making it brighter, down is making it darker. And that's why it goes from 0 to 255, where 255 is absolute white and 0 is black. Is everything making sense now? Now if we go back to this and if we make the dark areas brighter, see, the dark areas are getting brighter in the image. Let me show it to you again. The clouds are still dark, but the dark areas were getting darker before we added this point. So once we add the point and we take it up, the dark areas are getting brighter as well. So that is basically how the RGB channel of curves work. We're gonna talk about red, green, and blue later, but that is the basics of curves. If you understand this, you have understood 80% of how all of this works. And it's gonna be the same in all visual editing softwares. Okay, so let's go back to this. Any doubts? I wish it was a live class so I could just ask you if you had any doubts. Let's go through this again. First of all, this is the representation of the curve. All right, the basics is know that this is the input axis and this one is the output axis. Okay, now 0, 255, 255. It goes from 0 to 255 in the input axis from left to right, which means it goes from dark to bright. So you need to pick what brightness level you need to target. So that's why it's called target brightness level. And what do you want to do with it? That is the output. That is the result. That's why it's called result brightness level. This was just a curve for a representation. And that's pretty much all there is about the basics of curves. Now you must be wondering, Unmesh, why did you talk about numbers? We already know that it's simple to understand that left side is dark, right side is bright. If you want to make it brighter, you take it up. If you want to make it darker, you take it down. As simple as that. And that is curves explained in one sentence. But why the hell did we talk about numbers? This will be very useful in later examples. But right now, know that each brightness level in the input and in the output can be represented and plotted with these numbers. So for example, right here, we randomly created a point here with guessing, right? If you want to, by the way, delete a point, you can take it all the way up, it goes away. Just click it and drag it all the way up, it goes away. So as we created a point here, okay, now let me create a point anywhere, somewhere else so that it's clearer. And let me make sure that I'm not moving as I create it. So I'm going to create it with my mouse. Just a simple click. I moved it a bit. I don't want to move it. Okay. So this is the point that I created. If you are not able to see the input and the output, probably the curves adjustment layer is like this. So you need to drag from the bottom so that you can see the input and the output. So right now you have chosen a brightness level of 171. And that is the target brightness level. Let's go back to the graph. We have chosen the target brightness level or the input to be 171. Whoops. Let's select this point right there. I'm going to just click on it and make sure I don't move it. Okay. So this is 171 that we have selected. So if you count from right there, if it had a measure from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, something like that, at 171 would be right here. So this is 171 where we made a point. Now, let's look at the output right now. So right now the output is also 171, which means that we are not making any change. The input is 5 and the output is 5. There is no change. Okay? We are not making any changes right there. The input is the same as the output. And that is why, if you look at it, if you look at the graph, if you have studied mathematics, basic mathematics, you would understand this, that if you look at this graph, it goes from 0 to 255, and this point right here is 171. If you look at the y-axis, which is the output axis as well, if you look at this point is 171 as well. Okay, so that's why it's just at the diagonal. Now, if you take this point up, see, the output is changing. The input is still the same. All right. So I'm going to take it up a notch. I'm using the arrow keys to do it. So let's say I'm going to go with this. Okay. What does this mean? I have chosen the target to be 171. So this is 171 right over here. Okay. It's the same right now. That is the target brightness level. I'm making that brightness level brighter. So now the output is different. So the input is 171 and the output is higher, which means that we are making it brighter, right? And this just shows up in the diagram because this point somewhere here, it was 171 and this point somewhere here is 216. So we have taken 171 point and took it up to 216, and that's what it means right there, that we have had the input as 171 and the output as 216. Now do keep in mind, this is a smooth curve. So if you take this point up, a lot of other places go up as well. So even if I just click a point right here, you will notice that the input is not the same as the output. So for this point, because this point is selected, the input is 85 and the output is 126. So let's say for this brightness level, for the 85 brightness level, You do not want the brightness to change. You want it to be 85. You want the input to be the same as the output. So what do you do with that point selected? You just dial in 85. So for that point, the input is same as the output. Okay, I hope all of this makes sense. It's so simple to understand. If none of these make sense, just know one thing. The left side represents the dark areas. The right side represents the bright areas. Taking it up makes it brighter, and taking it down makes it darker. So if you want to make the bright areas darker, you know the bright areas are on the right hand side, so you would make a point on the right hand side. And how do you make it darker? By taking it down. So you take it down. Let's say you want to make the dark areas brighter. So we just learned the dark areas are on the left hand side. So we make a point on the left hand side. And how do we make things brighter? By taking it up. So we take it up, and this is how we make the dark areas brighter. So does this all make sense? I hope it has sunk in by now. Back to this example, and I'm going to show you how I would edit this, just to make it a little more dramatic and just simply make it pop. So first, I would create one curves adjustment layer. And in this, we want to have more details in the clouds, right? So we want to take it down. We want to bring down the clouds. So by the way, how do we know where exactly on the right hand side does the clouds fall? Because we know that the clouds are bright, but how bright it is? Is it 176 or is it 200? How bright are the clouds? How bright are these areas? How do we know that? Well, you choose this hand right there, and we're going to talk about directly just manipulating the curves with this hand later. But for right now, we're going to choose this hand right there and just pick a spot in the clouds. And you can also choose a sample size 5x5 average or 3x3 average. So let's pick this one, or let's go for this one. Okay. So we know once we hover over it, it's gonna show you where that falls exactly in the curve. So if I hover over a dark area, see it goes to the left hand side. If I hover over a bright area, see it goes to the right hand side. And if you click, it creates a point. Okay. Now I can go back. Let's deactivate it. Now I can go back and just make it a little darker. So I'm going to take it probably a little bit to the left. Okay. Let's make it a little darker. What do you think about that? What if I keep the curves at the top? It's going to be simple for all of us. I don't think so. Actually, I've made the screen a little bigger so it's legible for you to see. So we're going to make it a little darker. We're going to bring it down. See, so much drama. And we're going to make the darks even more darker just to bring more drama right there. But right now there's a problem with it. And you already have guessed it what the problem is. The problem is that the foreground of the ground becomes dark as well. So how do we deal with that? We learned about something in the previous lessons which is very useful in situations like these. And that is masks. So you select the mask, you choose a gradient. Choose a gradient from white to black. And white are the areas which shows up, black are the areas which hide. So I'm going to drag a gradient from right there. Oh, it became the opposite because reverse is checked. So uncheck that. And I'm going to drag in a gradient, something like this. And it works brilliantly. It only darkens the sky areas. A little bit of this area, that's fine too. But right now, we want a little more contrast on the ground as well. So what do we do now? Make a copy of this curve. So select the curves adjustment layer, press Ctrl or Command J and invert the mask. Select the mask, press Ctrl or Command I. So this time it's affecting just the ground. And we want to reset the curves. So let's double click on the symbol of the curves adjustment layer. Click on this button, it resets the curve. Now we want to add a little bit of contrast right there. And the way we do that is, again, use the hand. We want to make this area a little brighter. Just click. Okay. So I'm going to make it a little brighter like this. Yeah, it looks pretty cool. But I want to bring back the darkness in the dark areas. See, these areas are also getting brighter. So I'm going to just create a point and bring it down. This just adds a little more punch to it. Now, if you look at the image, it looks Superb. So here's the before, here's the after. If you think any of the areas went too far, we just went excess in some areas like the clouds, just decrease the opacity, or you can also play with the curves if you wish. So for me, I'm just gonna go with about 75-ish. And there you have it. Here's the before, here's the after. And we are just beginning to learn curves. There's so much more to it. Now, there are two ways that we can apply curves. Number one, as an adjustment layer, the way we just did. And number two, as an adjustment. So here we have another example. Let's take a look at it. In the background, we have a very simple background. And on top of that, we have our subject. Both are from very different images. So this is the original image for the subject and this is the background. All right. We already learned how to make a selection, how to mask. We learned a little bit about compositing in the selection lesson. So this is the case right here. And let's say we want to match the color of the subject with that of the background. How do we do it with curves? Simple. So first way of applying a curve is creating an adjustment layer, clicking on the adjustment layer icon and then choosing curves. And then you can start making adjustments. You're gonna make adjustment for this later. But right now when I make an adjustment, it's just making an adjustment both to the subject and the background as well. And that is, you can say that it's an advantage of adding curves as an adjustment layer, because it affects all of the layers beneath it. If you just want it to affect one layer just below it, if you just want to limit it to the subject layer or the layer which is below it, you can create a clipping mask. Click on this button, it creates a clipping mask. See this arrow? It's now only limited to the subject, which means whatever you do with the curve will be limited to the subject. Okay. Now, the other advantage actually, before we move on to adding curves as an adjustment, is if you're using an adjustment layer, it is an adjustment layer, which means it's highly non-destructive. At any point of your retouching or editing or compositing process, you can go back to this adjustment layer, change whatever you want. It's absolutely up to you. Okay, absolutely non-destructive, stays at the top, easy to identify, and there you go. That's adding curves as an adjustment layer. The other way is adding curves as an adjustment. And the way you do that is by going to Image, Adjustments, and then Curves. That's another way of adding curves. See? Now we have selected the subject layer and the adjustments are happening there, and hit OK. There are a couple drawbacks with this method. The very obvious drawback that you just noticed is that it's destructive. Let's say I did 1,000 steps after it. Okay, and I want to change something with the curve. I can't do it. It's not possible. I have to undo all of those 1,000 steps, get back to it, and probably I might not even have more undos than 1,000 steps unless we do some special changes in the preferences, which I'm not sure will be available in later versions of Photoshop. But you have to just undo a ton of steps, get back to it, and just, it's irreversible. It's not an adjustment layer. This is absolutely destructive. Okay. That's one disadvantage. Other disadvantage is that yes, you can definitely make it non-destructive, which is an advantage, but there's a disadvantage attached to it. So if you select this layer, you right click on it and you convert this into a smart object. Now, if you go to Image, Adjustments, and then Curves, and if you do something right there, I'm going to do something very harsh so that you can see. Now it is non-destructive. If you want to change anything, you would have to just open up the smart filter right there, change something, and the changes will take place. So that is one way of applying it in a non-destructive fashion. But to make it non-destructive, we needed to do a couple steps. We needed to do a couple things. Actually, one thing, and that is we needed to convert the layer into a smart object. And in doing that, we, number one, lost the mask Okay, we lost the mask, so if we need access to the mask, we need to double click on it and another document opens up and then we have the access to the mask, which is crazy. And the other thing is, if you go back, we lost the ability to paint on the layer. Now, since this is a smart object, I can't even do anything. I can't manipulate the pixels or do something, because if I try to do it, it says the smart object must be rasterized, and if you rasterize it, the curves is just burned to the pixels, making it non-destructive. So that is why I suggest that whenever you are adding curves, just use an adjustment layer. In very special cases like 0.0001% of the cases, you might have to use curves as an adjustment, but for the most part, just add an adjustment layer. Now you must be wondering, what are the special cases where I need to use curves as an adjustment? Let's say you're adding a lot of filters, a lot of smart filters, a lot of adjustments, and you want them to have the same mask. Maybe then you might want to just add it as an adjustment. So let's say I go to image, adjustment, and then curves. Then we move it up. There's also a workaround for it, but then this is the only reason I see I would use it. So I've added curves. Maybe I added, let's say some other filter right here, or even an adjustment like color balance. And on top of that, I added an adjustment called photo filter. Okay, all of that. And I want all of that to have the same mask. So you select that mask, press Ctrl or Command I. You take the brush, white as the foreground color, you paint that. So all of these three adjustments or smart filters have the same mask, and you can modify it at any time to your liking. So that's one of the reasons why you would want to use it. But then again, if you're using an adjustment layer, you can have the same masks, but this one has an advantage because you can modify the mask simultaneously for all of these three filters. If you're using adjustment layers, you can group it all and keep a mask for a group. It can get a little complicated, but you can do it. But this is one very rare situations where you would want to do that. But anyway, coming back to it, coming back to how it was, let's make an adjustment so that we can match the subject with that of the background. So click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose curves. Okay, it's right here. And first of all, if you look at the background, there's a lot of yellow in the highlights. So we're gonna go to the blue channel. We're gonna learn this later. Don't worry about it. Know that blue is the opposite of yellow. So if we take down the blues, yellows will appear. So the right hand side represent the highlights, the left hand side represent the shadows. As I told you, bright areas right hand side, dark areas left hand side. So we want to bring up yellows on the bright areas. So we take down the blues because blue is the opposite of yellow. Right now it's affecting the entire image. We want it to only affect the subject. So we click on this button, it creates a clipping mask. So we take that down. Now it's getting closer, but here's the problem. The shadows are also having a little bit of yellow, but if you look at the background, the shadows have blue in it. So we create a point right here and we take it up. For the shadow areas, we want it to be bluish. Okay, good. Now let's go to the green channel. Let's try decreasing it and increasing it, see what helps. Probably keep it a little bit right here. Now let's go to the red channel and let's see. We want a little more reds in the highlights. And we want less reds in the shadows. Just adding a little more cyan to it. And also let's go to the RGB channel. What do you think about the bright areas? So let's create a point right here and make it a little brighter. But the dark areas need to go a little darker, because if you look at the background, look at the trees, they're so dark, the dark areas which are opposite to the light. So we're gonna have to create a point right here in the dark areas. So you'll just take it down and there you go, we have pretty much matched it. So here's the before, here's the after. So that's how you match it. And also it's looking a little weird, you know, because the background is a little too sharp. So we need to add a little blur to it. Make a copy of the background, select the background layer, press Ctrl or Command J to make a copy. Then go to filter and then convert for smart filters. Don't forget it. Why do we do that? Why do we convert our layer into a smart object? So that we can change the values of the filter later. So now let's go to filter, blur. Sorry, let's try blur gallery. And inside of that, let's try tilt shift. We have already talked about blur gallery a lot in a previous lesson. So we're gonna start the blur right there. If you haven't watched it, do watch it. Watch the lesson about filters. So, okay, so that seems to be about right. Hit OK. Just a little bit of blur. And it makes the image a lot better. So there you go. So here's the before, here's the after, just a little bit of blur, add some depth to the image. And that's 2 ways to apply curves. Time for us to delve deeper into curves. And keep in mind, we are still learning about simple curves. We haven't even touched the advanced parts yet. Okay, so have a look at this photo. What do you see that you can fix? It looks perfect, it looks amazing, awesome. However, we know that as photographers or as photo editors, you would know that our attention always goes to the brightest parts. In this photo, we want our attention to go towards the face. However, her clothes are brighter, so our attention goes towards that. So how do we bring back the attention to the face? There are 2 ways. Make the clothes darker, make the face a little brighter, and we're gonna do both. So first of all, let's create a curves adjustment layer by clicking on the adjustment layer icon and then choose curves. And right in here, let's just keep it right there. We need to make the clothes darker. Now clothes are bright, and where do they fall? How do we find it? So click on the hand to find out where they exactly fall inside of the curve. So I'm gonna make a point right here, just click and it makes a point there. And now we can easily bring it down. Just zoom out, just make sure you're not bringing it down too much. Yeah, that seems about right. Now what happens is every dark area just goes a little more darker. So we want to bring back the dark areas. So let's just pick any of these areas like this and just bring it back to how it was before. It's just the clothes that we want to darken. But still, there are other bright areas that also got darkened, like her face. So here's the before, here's the after. We just want it down here. So select the mask with the help of the gradient again. Let's create a gradient so that it only affects the bottom. Now we did a reverse, so we have to do a gradient like this. Or let's do something like this. Okay, it looks better. So here's the before, here's the after. You see that? The clothes are now darkened. Now the attention goes straight to the face. So here's the before, the attention going too much towards the cloth. We want it on the face. So now if I turn it on, now you know the attention is going towards the face. Now we could have just moved on here, but do you want to go a little more advanced? Let's do it. We have already talked about BlendIf and how it works. And we're going to use it in this case as well, because if you have a look at the before and after, definitely, absolutely, definitely, we are taking the attention away from the cloth and just moving it on the face. But it's just looking too flat right there. There's no drama in it. So how do we bring back the drama? What if we just don't darken the extreme bright areas? And to do that, double click on the right hand side of the layer and take the slider of the underlying layer from right to left. That way you take that effect away from the extreme bright areas. So it's very harsh right now. So hold the Alt key, the Option key, click on the slider to break it apart, and now have a look. That way you don't completely apply the curve at all areas. You keep up the shine, you keep up the dimension, and now have a look at this. So here's the before, here's the after. You're still taking away the attention, but it's far better than this. So this was the before applying the BlendIf, and this is after applying the BlendIf. You see that change right there? Before BlendIf, so flat, and after BlendIf, so much drama. Still, we are taking care of the attention. Now let's add a little contrast to the image by creating one more curves adjustment layer. Click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose curves. And now I want to make this area a little brighter. So with the help of the hand right there, we're going to make a point right there and we can take it brighter. And by the way, I'm going to show it right now. Why talk about it later? So once you make a point, you can directly drag it right here. You don't even have to touch the curves. So we're going to just drag and make it a little brighter like this. Just click in the dark area of the face and make it a little darker. So this adds a lot of contrast, little contrast actually. So here's the before, here's the after, but there's a problem with this. You know what it is? It is also just adding too much saturation to the photo, right? Here's the before, here's the after. It adds the contrast, but too much color, right? Now, what if you want to add curves in such a way that it does not touch the colors and only the luminosity, only the brightness levels, and we don't want it to affect the colors? How do we do that? Change the blend mode of this curves adjustment layer to luminosity. And now have a look. This way it's not affecting the color. So this is the normal blend mode. It's making it too saturated. If you choose the luminosity, it's not affecting the color. Sometimes it can be a good thing, like in this case. Other times it can be a bad thing. Sometimes it just alters with the skin tone so much that it just looks fake and not very appealing. Sometimes it works, so you need to play with it. In this case, it was doing damage to the skin tone by adding too much saturation. So we changed the blend mode to luminosity and it looks good. So it's okay. If it didn't look good, we would keep it normal, and then later probably with a hue saturation adjustment layer, take down the saturation or do some other adjustments. And the thing with curves is that this can just get addictive. You can keep on adding curves after curves after curves, and in a moment you find out that you're on your 100th curve in the same document. So I'm feeling like adding one more curve right here, making the highlights a little brighter. So we're gonna make the highlights a little more brighter right there, just like this. Okay, this looks good. Now you can add a fade with curves, but I would like to add a color lookup table to it. So click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose color lookup. And then here you can choose whatever you want. And let's go for futuristic bleak. Now I love the fade here, but I don't like the color. I only want it to touch the brightness levels and add a fade and not touch the colors. So what do? We just learned it. Change the blend mode from normal to luminosity. That way the colors would be intact. Have a look. So here's the before, here's the after. We added the fade. Let's take a look at the complete before and after. So if you zoom out, you need to zoom out to see the change because we played with the attention a little bit as well. So here's the before. The attention is going too much towards the cloth. There's not much attention over the face. Here is the after. It's very, very subtle, but just look at it. It's faded. It just is nice and calm to look at, but also at the same time, the attention is switched. Here's the before, here is the after. The more problems you can solve with the subtlest adjustment, the better. I'm not saying you cannot go extreme. Go extreme if you want. There are some really cool things you can do with it. Now let's learn how to use curves with hands. Obviously, we're going to be using these hands, but we are specifically talking about hand inside the curve. That's going to make using curves very simple. And let's say for this example, we want to create a stark, contrasty black and white image. So let's start with the curves adjustment layer. Click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose curves. First of all, we're going to increase the contrast, have something faded effect. And then we can start working on the contrast. But before we do that, let's also create a black and white adjustment layer on top of that by clicking on the adjustment layer icon and then choosing black and white. Okay, now let's come back to the curves. Now the hand that I'm talking about is this one, scrubby hand right over there. Let's activate that. Now as we learned before, if you hover over an area, it tells you where it would fall in the curve. See, this area is being highlighted as I hover over this. The other thing that you can do is, instead of just making points and identifying where the curves would fall, you can also just adjust it on the fly. So let's say I want to make this area, these areas a little brighter. So you click and drag it up right in the image, which is very, very interesting. Now I want to darken these areas, so click and drag it down. See the stark contrast we are creating right there? This black and white is looking amazing already. What else we can do? We can create a faded effect. So for the faded effect, let me adjust it a little bit like this. Okay, so create one more curves adjustment layer. You want to make the extreme dark a little bright to create the fade. So we want to take the point on the extreme left. We're going to take it up just like this. See? And also we want to take the extreme bright areas and make it darker. So we're gonna do it this way. And also if you want to add a curve, just click and drag it down. This adds a little more drama. On top of that, maybe we're gonna add a curves adjustment layer, one more, and make the bright areas a little more brighter. And bring it down just to continue that fade. Here's the before, here's the after. Just adds a little more, punch to the image. Now to make it more interesting, you can definitely go to the black and white adjustment layer properties and just play with these. Just play with the reds, the yellows, and the blues and see what works great for you. So I'm gonna increase the reds a little bit, play with the yellows, and green doesn't have much of an effect. You can play with the cyan, have more details right here. If you increase it, it'll be brighter. If I decrease it, it's just bringing a little more attention towards the face. So little adjustments like this. If I increase the blue, see this dimension in the shirt just adds up, which is exciting. Play with the magenta, see what it does. Okay, now on top of that, you can just add a little bit of grain to make it more exciting. So press Ctrl Shift N, Command Shift N to open up the new layer dialog box. Choose the blend mode overlay and make sure you check fill with overlay neutral color. Now keep in mind overlay is a blend mode which just hides anything that is 50% gray. So it fills the layer with 50% gray, and since the blend mode is overlay, it just hides that. So right now normal you will see 50% gray. If you choose overlay, that'll be hidden. Now anything which is brighter than 50% gray, those areas are brightened when the overlay blend mode is chosen. Anything which is darker than 50% gray, those areas are darkened. Okay, as we have learned a little bit before. So now what we have to do is to go to filter and convert for smart filters so that we can change the values of the filter later. Let's go to filter again and noise, add noise. Let's go for 35-ish. And this adds a brilliant noise to it, but it's too small, too sharp. So let's add a blur to it. Go to filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. I'm gonna go with the 1 pixel, hit OK. Great. We only want noise in the dark areas, not so much in the bright areas, and that's how noise works in most cases. So take it away from bright areas by taking the slider of the underlying layer from right to left. Again, hold the Alt key or the Option key, click on the slider to break it apart. It's just the same thing over and over again. Just make the transition a little smoother. This works. Hit OK once you're satisfied right there. And there you have it, a wonderful image, a wonderful black and white image. And so dramatic just by using curves. So here's the before. This is the colorful version. This is the black and white film grain version. Whatever you want to call it. This is how to work with hands in curves. By the way, I took a little more time with sharpening. And let me share with you my final image. This is the final image, and we're going to be talking about sharpening later. But if you have a look, so much sharpening on the face. Do you want to learn it right now? We're going to be talking about sharpening later, but do you really want to learn it? Why not? Let's do it a little bit. So with the background layer selected, make one copy by pressing Ctrl or Command J. Place it at the very top. Alright. Or place it under the grain. So this one is the grain of the noise one. Place it under it. And then desaturate it. Control Shift U, Command Shift U to take away all the colors from this. Then go to filter, convert for smart filters, hit OK. Now filter, this one is important, other high pass. So for the first one, first pass, let's add a lot of high pass. This is for adding a little structure, the same thing you see with clarity inside of Camera Raw or Lightroom. So we're gonna go with about 25-ish on this one. Change the blend mode to overlay. This adds a little bit of nice structure to it. Turn off the grain for now. But it also adds a little bit of halo to it. So here's the before, here's the after. See the halo? We don't want it everywhere. Also look at the halo around the hair. So select this, hold the Alt key, the Option key, and click on the mask button. This creates a negative mask. You take the brush, white as the foreground color, and just paint on the areas where you want to draw the attention to. That way you won't have a lot of halos. So we're gonna go with this. If you want, you can have a little bit of it on his shirt. Just a little bit of extra there, here and there. On top of that, you can make one more copy of this by pressing Ctrl or Command J. And this one, you can just decrease the high pass value to about, let's go for 4-ish. This is for sharpening extra details. And you can turn off the mask right there or delete the mask altogether. This just adds an overall additional sharpening over it. This really adds a lot. And on top of that, when you add grain, it just adds so much more to the image. So let me show you. So if I just make a group out of these sharpening layers, just group both of them. So here's the before, here's before sharpening, here's after sharpening and adding structure. Just adds so much difference. If you want some additional sharpening, you can just make a duplicate of that and just it adds additional sharpening, makes for a very interesting image. Now besides the RGB channel, there are other channels and curves as well. And it's just obvious, red, green and blue. Now if you're working in CMYK, you would have cyan, magenta, yellow as well. So right now, if I create a curves adjustment layer right here, you will see the RGB channel, which is the combination of red, green and blue. So this is an important thing. And this is something which you should pay very close attention to. Alright. Now, when you're working with RGB channel, all it means that you're moving the curves of the red channel, the green channel and the blue channel together simultaneously by equal values. And all of these combined together to give you the image. Okay. So right now, if I choose red, okay, and if I do something, let's say if I create a point in the middle, or let's choose the input to about 100. Okay, we're going to do a very simple thing and the output to about 200. Okay, and we're going to do the same with the green channel as well. Input 100, output 200. Did we do the same with the red channel? The green channel? Oh, we chose the point in the corner. So we need to create a point in the middle. Input 100, output 200. Let's do the same with the blue channel. Create a point, input 100, whoops, and the output, whoops. So let me just do it properly. 100, output 200. Great. So this is the result that we are getting. For all the red, green and blue channel, the curve is the same. Okay. So this is just by doing separate R, G and B channels. Okay. Now, if I do the same thing with another curves right there, we turned it off by the way, and we create a point and we are in the RGB channel, input 100 and the output 200, and look at the result. This is the combined RGB and this is separate RGB channel. So this is the result with the combined RGB and this is the result with the separate RGB. It's the exact same thing. So what did we learn from this? Let me just delete both of these. Let's keep this one. So what did we learn from these? We learned that whenever you're playing with the RGB channel, it is just the combination of all of those three channels, red, green and blue, and if you play with the RGB curve, it is just equivalent to moving all of these curves of the R, G and B channel simultaneously with the same values. Which means that if you have the same curve for R, G and B, it will be equivalent to the curve for the RGB channel, and that's why it's called the RGB channel. And that's why, since it moves all of them simultaneously, it deals with pure brightness and no color involved. Of course, it just changes the saturation here and there, but that's a separate topic. But this is the basics right there. All right. By the way, to reset the curve, you can click on this button right there. And also, I should have told you this before. If you want to look at the before and after, definitely you can turn off and turn on the layers. Other thing that you can do is you can click and hold this one. It'll show you the before, and when you release it, it'll show you the after. Okay, so let's reset the curve again. Let's do some color grading on this one. Now we know that the right side represents the bright areas and the left side represents the dark areas. Now whenever you're dealing with these channels other than the RGB, so let's go with the reds. If you want to add reds to the highlights, just break down the sentence first. I want to add red to the highlights. Let's look at it in this way. Where do you want to add the reds? In the highlights. Where are the highlights? On the right hand side. So I'm going to make a point on the right hand side. If you want to add the reds or increase the reds, what do? Just like brightness, we take it up. If you want to decrease the reds, you just take it down. So in this case, I want to add it. So let's take it up, something like this. And I don't want reds to be increased in the shadows, so I'm going to take it down like this. Okay, let's move over to other channels. Now, if you look at this image, I want to reduce green in the shadows, but you also can look at in a way and say that I want more magenta in the shadows. Getting confused? Well, here's another concept that we need to learn about. The opposites. Know that red is the opposite of cyan, green is the opposite of magenta, and blue is the opposite of yellow. RGB, opposite of CMY. So when you decrease the reds, cyan shows up. When you decrease green, magenta shows up. And when you decrease blue, yellow shows up. That's what happened with one of the earlier examples where we were matching the subject with that of the background by adding yellow in the highlights. Remember that? That's exactly what we were doing. So let's say in this case, I want to add magenta to the shadows, make magenta show up. So there's no magenta channel in there. So we're going to go to green, and we know the green is opposite of magenta. So we decrease the green in the shadow. That just brings up magenta, but we didn't want to bring up magenta in the highlight. So we want to just take it up like this. And there you have it. Now I wish to add a little bit warmth to the entire image. So let's go to the blue channel and just create a point in the middle and take it down like this, and have a look at what a wonderful effect it creates. So take a look. Here's the before, here is the after. Now on top of that, we know that RGB is a RGB channel right there is the combination of red, green and blue. Whatever we now do with the RGB can also be done by individually changing the curves of red, green and blue, but it just makes it more convenient if you want to play with the combination later for fading or adding contrast effects. So on top of that, we can also play with the RGB a little bit. So I'm going to make the highlights a little darker and then make the shadows a little more darker and add a little fade by bringing it up like this. But right now I see too much color right here. So just below the curves adjustment layer, create a hue saturation and let's take it down to about -15. Just takes care of a little color. So here's before. You see too much color, too much saturation. Here's the after. It takes care of it. You can just take it even further. So I'm going to go with -24. How do you feel about that? That looks good. So let's take a look. So here's the before. Not exciting. The colors also don't pop and it just doesn't look very interesting. Here is the after. Just look at the effect. Such a massive difference, isn't it? So that's how to work with different channels inside of curves. Just figure out if you want reds in the highlights, create a point on the right hand side of the red channel inside of the curves and just take it up. If you want blues in the shadows, just create a point on the left hand side or take the leftmost point and just increase it. If you want yellow in the highlights, know that yellow is the opposite of blue. Remember the opposites. Create a point on the right hand side in the blue channel, blue curve, sorry, and just take it down. As simple as that. The curves also has a lot of automatic features. So if you want to bring a particular shade of color to a particular shade, you can do it automatically with curves. And by the way, this technique can also be used to remove color casts as well. So we're back to the image again, and let's say this time we want to just create a standard color for this. Neutral standard color with standard contrast. So click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose curves. Now look at these three eyedroppers. One is for the white point, one is for the black point, and one is to set the gray point. What does that mean? Let's say you want to adjust the white balance, just like the white balance eyedropper you see in Lightroom. Similar to that, let's say you want to make sure and you know that this area in real life while this photo was being taken is neutral gray. You know that. But after you processed it, maybe got it into the computer, the color changed a little bit. So you want to set it to the exact color. So that's why the color checkers and the color charts exists for photographers, so that with the first shot, the model can hold the color checker, and then later we can just fix it with curves or white balance adjustment points and eyedroppers. Anyway, so you know that this area is supposed to be neutral gray. So you click on this eyedropper and click on this, and suddenly it just automatically makes adjustments. And have a look at this. Here's the before. It had a little blue tint to it, and here is the after. Much more realistic. Look at the warmth right here. Look at the skin tone right here. So realistic, so neutral, so right. Okay? Now, you don't always have to be right. If you want to be artistic, you can also do that, and it has a lot of purposes as well. So right now, if you double click on this, it is set to 50% gray, because you can tell brightness is 50%, hue saturation is 0. You can also tell that by looking at RGB values, which are all at 128. You can set it to whatever color you want. So let's say I want to set it to green. Let's choose something weird right here. Let's choose this green. Do you want to save it as default? Do you want to save this green as a default color for that? Let's choose no, because I don't want it to be default. I want to keep the default as gray. This is for one-time use right now. So now when I click, that area will turn green, exact green that we chose, and curves will automatically make adjustments to make that happen. But that is something really advanced. Right now, let's just focus on the regular stuff. So let's set it back to make sure it's already set it is back to its original values. So I'm going to delete the curves. If you add another curves, it should be back at gray because we didn't set it as default. If it isn't, you can always just set it back to gray by double clicking on it. Now let's look at these two other points. So this is the white point, and by the way, this is very useful if you're matching colors in advanced composites. Maybe we'll talk about that later in the compositing class, but right now let's just focus on what these are. So this is the white point, and it is set to white. You can set it to whatever color you want. Now here's what you do with it. You click on the brightest point of the image, brightest point that you can see, and let me give you a tip. The brightest point on any image will be the light source. So in this case, there are two. One is inside, one is outside. I'm guessing that it's going to be the outside, which is brighter. So let's click on that, and it's going to set the point that you click in to absolute white. Now for the black point, you click on that, you activate that. Click on the darkest area of the image. So in this case, I'm guessing you can also find that out with curves as well. This one. And it's going to adjust that accordingly. If there are some color tints on in there, it's going to remove it. So now have a look. It's just taking advantage of the full contrast. On top of that, you can go to the middle one and click on an area which should have been gray in real life. And now it's also taken care of. Now have a look at this. Here's the before, here's the after. All automatically. Isn't this exciting? It's great, isn't it? So that's how to work with eyedroppers in curves. And by the way, any curve you create can be saved as a preset for other images as well. So here we have the image that we just created, and we created a curve for it. You can save it as a preset, and it already has some presets here. So I can save it as a preset by simply clicking on this 3 grid right there. Save curves preset. You can save it in the location of your choice. I'm just gonna name it Unmesh 1. Okay, now we can load it in this one. So just click on in there. I can load Unmesh 1 in this one as well. So for this one, let's create one more curves adjustment layer and on that one, we're gonna load it. So you can load Unmesh 1 on there. So it also creates a brilliant effect. I love it. If you only want to keep the color of it, this is the opposite of the previous example where we didn't want to keep the color and we only wanted to touch the luminosity and not let it touch the color. But let's say you only want to touch the color and nothing else, not the brightness levels. So you change the blend mode to color. So here's the before, here's the after. Add some really warmth and wonderful colors to it, but I would choose to keep it normal. Maybe play with fade a little bit here and there. This creates a wonderful effect. Decrease the opacity, slowly and gradually increase it, and keep it at about 40%. So here's the before, here's the after. Just look at the warmth and the drama of the image. It's just mind-boggling. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but curves is a genius, a wonderful, a versatile, a really useful tool actually. One of the questions that has haunted me for a while is that why is a curve diagonal? Why is it not just horizontal? And this question might be really making a room in your mind as well. And there's a simple answer to it, and this is something that we should learn. So let's create a curves adjustment layer. As you can see by default, this curve that you see, which is not right now a curve, is diagonal by default. And this is the original state of the image. Now, why is it diagonal? Now we know that the right hand side represent the bright areas and the left hand side represent the dark areas if we look on the input axis, right? Now, let's look at the leftmost area. What is the leftmost area? 0 in number, which is absolute black. Now let me ask you a question. Can you make the absolute black or 100% black any blacker? No, it is just not possible. So how do you make things darker in curves? By taking it down. But in this case, I can't make 100% black any blacker. So there should be no option of taking it further down. And that is why, if you look at the leftmost point, there is a ground we hit. We can't take this point beyond this because we cannot make 100% black any blacker, right? The left hand side represent 100% black, the leftmost point. And if you look at the output axis, we make it brighter by taking it up, and definitely we can make absolute black brighter, but we cannot make it any blacker. So that's why you hit the ground. Now, if you look at the right hand side, the rightmost point is absolute white, 100% white. Can you make 100% white any whiter or any brighter? No, and that's why we hit the roof right there. And this structure of the curve explains why curves is diagonal and not horizontal or vertical or any other shape. I hope it makes sense. Now let me share with you a simple trick to expand the range of the image using curves. Now if you look at this image, sometimes what happens is that the image is not taking full advantage of the whole dynamic range that the screen has to offer. Which means that the brightest bright of the image is not absolutely white and the darkest dark of the image is not absolutely black. If we do that, it gives a pop to the image. Now sometimes it is done due to artistic purposes, just as we did in one example where we created a black and white image, we added a little fade on purpose. On the contrary, if you want to add a little pop, here's what you do. You create an adjustment layer, and the name of the adjustment layer is curves, definitely. Now, if you have a look at the histogram right there, by the way, the histogram is simply the number of pixels in different brightness levels. So let's say for brightness level of this, which is, let's say 20, there are these many pixels. For brightness level of, let's say 200, there are a ton of pixels. So this is just a graph of the number of pixels, where the y-axis or the vertical axis is the number of pixels, and the input axis or the x-axis is just the brightness level. So for different brightness levels, how many pixels are there? Now, as you can see that beyond this, there are no pixels. So pixels are not taking advantage, the dark pixels are not taking advantage of the range that is available right there, and the bright pixels are not taking advantage of the range that is available right here. Now we can just expand the range by taking the slider to the right and taking this one to the left. Now if we take it too much, we begin to lose details. See, we are beginning to lose details in this areas, and we take it too much to the left as well, we begin to lose details in the highlights. So how do we know when we are starting to lose details? Well, the way we do that is by holding the Alt key or the Option key and then move the slider. Just when you begin to see artifacts, which means that in those areas we are losing the details. Just when you're beginning to see the artifacts, I would stop right there. Similarly with the right hand side, hold the Alt key or the Option key, bring it to the left. Just when you begin to see the artifacts, stop. Which means those are the areas where we are losing details. And there you go. That's how you just expand the dynamic range. And on top of that, you can make things a little more brighter and just add a little punch to it. That's up to you. But that's how to just expand the range of an image. Now for the last example, let's do something exciting. Let's completely change the background right from scratch. We're going to place in the subject on a brand new background. So this is the background we have, and then using curves, we're going to match it. So this is the background we have, and this is the subject image that we have. So just drag it and drop it over the canvas right there. Now we don't want photographs to be taken on railway tracks. You know how dangerous it can be. I'm just requesting the photography community, who are especially new photographers, to please not do photo shoots on the railway track. There has been lots of accidents due to that. Don't do it. So this has been done and we want to change it. We want to set up a good example. So let's change the background. Okay. Now let's say to select the subject, there are lots of ways. We have talked about it in the selections lesson, but right now we're just going to use the select subject because that is the simplest way, and you can always take the time for selections later. It does a pretty good job, and here it kind of missed out on some. So you want to subtract this, hold with the quick selection tool, select it, hold the Alt key, the Option key, and just subtract this entire area. It does an okay job. Okay, great. Now click on the mask button to mask it all out. Boom, changed. Now we need to match it. And also if you look at the color, if you look at the light in the background, the light is coming from the right hand side, and that's why you have sunlight right over here. So if you look at this image, the light is coming from the left hand side, so we need to invert it. So you can also invert the background. That's up to you what you want to invert. Press Ctrl or Command T for this one, right click on it, and then choose Flip Horizontal. That looks a little more realistic, and also we can just make them a little smaller, or the other things that we can do is we can select the background. Right now we can't do anything in here. We can't make it bigger or smaller because it's locked. So click on the lock, unlock it, press Ctrl or Command T, move the anchor point at the top so that we can make it larger from the top. Hold the Alt key or the Option key so that it makes it larger from the anchor point. There's so much to it. We talked about it already, most of the things. The anchor points and the transformation. There's a whole lesson on that. Anyway, so this looks okay, but still there's something missing. If you look at the original photo, it's a photo taken with a shallow depth of field. So if you look at the current photo, the background is so sharp that it looks unrealistic. So make a copy of the background. We always want to have a backup, or don't make a copy. Just convert this into a smart object by going to Filter, Convert for Smart Filters. That way, if you want to take away the blur later, you can do that easily. And then let's go to Filter and Blur Gallery. You can do Tilt Shift, you can do normal Gaussian blur. So I'm going to do Tilt Shift. I want to add a little gradual blur. I want blur start right there and just end right above there. And let's just adjust the blur accordingly. See how do you want to do it. Yeah, that looks about right. So I'm going to go with about 54 and hit OK. We are already getting there. There's a check layer that we're going to use right here is the luminosity check layer. The luminosity check layer is a check layer that we don't apply in the image. It is just that that's something we use it to edit the image, to match the colors, to just check certain things. So the luminosity check layer just checks the luminosity, takes away the color so that you can match the brightness first. So click on the adjustment layer icon and then choose solid color. Choose any gray color, white, gray, black, any color with no saturation. Hit OK. Change the blend mode right here to color. That's the best way to just take away all the colors, as opposed to adding a hue saturation adjustment layer and taking down the saturation, because there's a reason for it. Do you want to know? Why not? This is a course. If this was a YouTube video, I wouldn't have shown because it has to be shorter. So with this course, I love that I have the freedom to make it as long as I want. Anyway, so let's say you had a gradient. Okay, so I'm gonna make a simple gradient from, let's say, yellow, bright yellow, the brightest yellow, to the brightest red. hit OK, right? Just like this. Now, if you ask me technically, which is brighter, yellow or red? If you look at the numbers inside of the color picker, both are of the same brightness, because if you take the color picker, this one also has a brightness of 100. If you pick the yellow, this one also has a brightness of 100. But if you ask a kid, or if you ask just a general human normal vision, definitely would say that yellow is brighter than the red. Okay? Now, if I would to take away the colors using hue saturation, it would all become flat gray. It's not related to the human eye or how human eye perceives brightness, bright or dark things. However, if I add a solid color adjustment layer, gray solid color adjustment layer, black or white, and turn it on and change the blend mode to color, now it shows it correctly. It shows yellow as brighter than the red, and that's why we use that as a check layer. Makes sense now? Okay, so now we're going to create a curves adjustment layer on top, and the first one is only for brightness, and we are only going to deal with brightness on this one. Let's name this brightness. Just keep things separate so that we can come back to that later. Now, I feel that the subject is definitely too bright, but also if you have a look at his shirt, it is brighter than even the light source. If you look at the background, what is the light source in this image? The light source is the sky, which means that there cannot be anything which can be brighter than the sky. It is just not possible. So how can his shirt be brighter? Right? So we need to take care of that. So with the help of the hand right there, you can just create a point and take it down. It's the rightmost point, so I'm going to take it down, but it's affecting the entire thing. We want to limit it just to the subject. So click on this button. That way it's limited just to the subject. Make sure it's darker than that of the sky. So right now it's brighter. We're going to take it down slowly and gradually. Now it can be equal to the sky because it's absolutely white and reflecting everything, and there can be a sun in the other side. So yeah, it's possible. If there's a sun in the scene, it's possible, which there is. And sun is not in the frame. So as I told you, nothing can be brighter than the light source, but light source can be outside the frame as well. Now create a point in the middle and take it down and see how it affects. Now the good way while you're matching elements of composite is zoom out a lot, and then look at it. So this is the regular. If you take it down, is it matching or making it better or worse? What is it doing? So this one, about this one looks okay. Now if you look at the dark areas of the background, they are a little brighter. So we're gonna make a point right here and try to make it brighter and match that with that of the background. See, it's really working out a lot. Okay, so that works. So let's take a look at the before and after. So this is the before, zoom out, not matching at all, and this is the after. It's getting so much better. Now I want to add a little more brightness to it. So let's add a curves adjustment layer and also clip it. And then we're gonna add a little more brightness to the entire thing. And a little more contrast. Not much contrast, this is okay. So here's the before, here's the after. We are getting a little closer. So we have matched in the brightness. We don't need the check layer. We can turn it off, or you can also delete it. It's not much needed. This already is looking pretty cool. Now let's match the color. By the way, let's name it brightness 2. Let's add another curves adjustment layer. And this time we're gonna make sure that the dark areas are blue, because if you have a look at the dark areas of the background, they are blue right there. Here as well, they are blue. So we wanna make sure we add a little blue to the dark areas of the image as well. So find out a dark area, and this is where you can use the eyedropper. So one of the things that you can do here is that find out the darkest area of the background. So in this case, I think the darkest area of the background can be this area. You're gonna pick that area. So double click on this, just sample the darkest area of the background. It's not sampling, it's white. So make sure that the symbol is selected, not the mask. Double click on it. Let's set it to this dark blue. Hit OK. We don't want to save it as defaults. Now we want to set the same area, set the same thing to that of the subject. First of all, let's click on this button to limit it just to the subject, and then let's click on the darkest area of the subject. Make sure it's something neutral. So in this case, I feel that definitely we need to find that inside the cloth. So this area can be there. Let's choose the point sample. So it gets a little closer, but let's go back. It's kind of too much. Let's try someplace else. Maybe this hair. Does that help? Well, it just matches a lot. If you have a look, here's the before, here's the after. It matches a lot, but then it just makes it a little faded. So we're gonna have to how do you say it? How do I say it? We have to just balance it by the RGB channel. So for the RGB, we're gonna take it to the right to remove the fade. Adds a little blues to the shadows. So here's the before, here's the after. Really adds a little blue. And also the highlights look okay. Everything looks okay. So if we go back to the blues, maybe we can just reduce it a little bit. Okay. And everything looks fine. So here's the before, here's the after. It's matching a lot. And I don't think there's so much that we can do here. It's pretty much going great. One of the other things that you can also do to match the colors is make a copy of this whole thing. Okay. Yeah, it's gonna apply that thing again. Put it at the top. Okay. Also clip it by holding the Alt key or the Option key. Click on the line between these two layers. Delete the smart filter. And then just apply a simple Gaussian blur. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. A value of 400, 500 or 1000 is fine. So let's go with this one. Hit OK. And we just want the colors of the background, and that's why we're doing it. Change the blend mode from normal to... For this one, change the blend mode from normal to color. It really gives it that color, but it's kind of too much. So let's decrease it. Let's increase it slowly and gradually and keep it at about 25-ish. It's really just gives that same color. Now take a look. Here's the before, not matching at all. Here's the after, so nicely matching. And on top of that, you can just add a little bit of contrast here and there. Also clip it. I'm gonna add a little bit of yellows to it in the highlights. And just make the blues normal in the shadows. And there you have it, an exciting color matching. So here's the before, here's the after. It matches it even more. And to blend everything well, I always suggest that at the end, you add a global effect. It can be a simple curve. It can be a color lookup table. A global effect is something that you add both to the background and the subject. In this case, we can add a simple color lookup table. As I'm gonna add a crisp warm, it always works. So let's go with about 30%. And on top of that, we can do another color lookup. For this one, we can go with edgy amber or something else. Let's scroll through them. And by the way, to scroll through them, if you're using Windows, this is applicable. With the mouse, you click on one of these and just scroll through them with the scroll of the mouse. This really gives it a very airy feeling. Here's the before, here's the after. I love this as well. One of the other ones that I liked is soft warming. Here's the before, here's the after. Really gives it a soft effect. And fall colors is also really cool as well. So yeah, so these are some of the ones that I love. Now fall colors, I feel that it's adding too much yellows and just making the subject a little stand out too much. So for that one, we're gonna add one more curves. And we're gonna take away the yellows from the highlights by adding a little blue. So here's the before, here's the after. It's not working. What if we add a hue saturation adjustment layer? Click on the adjustment layer and then choose hue saturation. We want to limit it to the subject, so click on this button. Now we can just simply take down the saturation, or we can just simply go to the yellows, target the yellows, and in here we can just change the hue a little bit and maybe take down the saturation. Yellows are not properly targeted, so I'm going to expand the range here. And and bring the saturation and the hue back to 0 and slowly and gradually adjust it. Let's decrease the hue just a little bit and the saturation a lot more. It really helps a little. So let's take a look now. So here's before, too much yellow, and here is after. This looks a little normal, so we're gonna go with opacity of 50%, or let's go with, this is very minimal change, hard to notice. Let's go with 70%. And this looks really, really good. And on top of that, we can always just go and add a little noise or any kind of textures. So I'm gonna just quickly add noise like we did in the black and white example. If you haven't catched it, you can just quickly just rewind the video and watch it. 35 in here, and take it away from the bright areas, just as we did with that image. Cool. Add a little blur to the noise, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, 1 pixel blur to the noise, and there you have a beautiful, beautiful color matched background. I feel that I want to add just a little color grading above the background, just a color lookup just for the background, and I want to add fall colors just to the background. Just matches it so very much. I was just having this feeling. There's no technique to it, just having this feeling of adding that, and just makes it so much better. Let's go with 40, and there you have it. Wonderful. So there you go. Let me just make the let's go to the panel options and make it smaller so that all of it is visible. So here is the before, not matching at all, and here is the after. Just look at the difference. That's the magic of curves, my friend. It's such a versatile tool. You can use it with compositing, retouching, even if you're designing, and it has a variety of utility uses as well. It's something that I always use no matter what I do, what I'm doing in Photoshop. It can be used to check something. It can be used to check the brightest point or the darkest point. So if you want to find out which area is the brightest in this image, you can just apply curves for it and take this point just to the right. And at the end, you will see that this area is the brightest, and you can also even find the brightest point or the darkest point. There's so many uses of curves, and if you just understand how curves work, you don't have to learn or go in and find out the different uses or techniques. Whatever you want to do, whatever is there in your mind, you can just achieve it if you just understand the concept. My hope is that through this lesson, you were able to understand how curve functions, and from there, again, the sky is the limit, or I must say the universe or the cosmos or is the limit, or everything is limitless. That's a better way to put it. I hope this lesson helped you, and I'll see you again on the next one. Till then, stay tuned and make sure that you keep creating.